when you guys need to change your oil, there's two reasons why you need to change your engine oil. The first one is because the oil additives actually wear out. Oil itself, the petroleum base that they use, doesn't wear out. What wears out is the additives. If you look at the detergent can only absorb so much. If you take dishwater and you put too much grease in it, what happens to the foam that's been in there? It pretty much goes away. It gets bound up in all the grease. Same thing happens with the detergents in your oil. They can only take so much dirt off before they wear out. The other thing is the dispersants, it's like putting your arms out and someone's stacking wood on you. They're going to get to a point where they can keep stacking wood on you, but it's just going to keep falling off. And so dispersants can only hold in suspension so much debris, and then it starts to settle out. So if you ever took an engine apart that had a lot of sludge in the bottom, it's because the dispersants wore out. They'd run the oil too long. And so it does need to be changed. So the first reason is the additives wear out. The second reason is all that material that's burned in there and the oxidation and stuff, it just gets into the oil and you need to get the dirt and the debris out. And so oil or engines produce two things. One, the byproducts from the oxidation and the carbon that bypasses the rings, and where metal particles, from the metal particles touching each other, you get little fine pieces of metal. And you want to get that out before it goes around too many times and does damage. The oil itself has 5 purposes. The first one is lubrication. Most of you know that you put oil in, it keeps it lubricated. I never want to see 2 pieces of metal touch each other. So I want to have at least boundary lubrication, which means the minimum amount of oil or lubrication before the 2 metal particles start to touch. If I get more or less than boundary lubrication, that's where something like this takes place, where the 2 metal particles start to touch each other, causes friction, that causes heat, and then it starts to melt and the 2 pieces just weld themselves together. And so this is an object that ran a little bit low in oil, and it ran past boundary lubrication and it caused it to seize.
What is that?
We'll talk about that here in a little while. The little piece sticking up. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. Second thing it does is it cools. Most people think of their radiator fluid as what cools your engine. Well, radiator fluid only goes from the very bottom of the cylinder up. That's the only thing that's there. Well, you have a crankshaft and connecting rod and a piston that's not touching that cooling system. And so the only thing that cools the bottom of the piston and the connecting rod and the crankshaft is the oil. So as the oil is either pumped, sprayed, or splashed up into that engine, it hits the piston, it hits the cylinder walls, and it runs down, and it cools as it does that. Now if you get this oil that's been cooling all those hot surfaces and it runs down, it's going to end up in the oil pan. And if you've got an oil pan like on a dirt bike or on a car or a pickup with a skid plate, and it gets full of debris and dust and dirt and leaves and whatever else is in there, the oil pan is not exposed to the air and it can't radiate the heat. Your oil will overheat and will cause it to break down. So if you've got any kind of equipment, mowers and stuff that have skid plates or a pan of some sort, and it gets dirt and grease in there, you need to clean it out, because this cooling process, it finally got to the oil pan, but it needs to radiate out. And if you insulate it, it can't radiate. It's going to overheat the oil and cause it to break down. It also deadens noise. I don't know how many of you guys have started a vehicle, and the first 30 seconds to a minute, the thing clatters. You hear your lifters tapping, and just it rattles, and then all of a sudden it kind of quiets down. It's quieting down because oil is finally reaching those 2 metal particles and getting between them and cushioning them. And it acts as a cushion, quiets the engine down, and it protects the 2 so it's not metal to metal. It seals. If you actually look at a piston, that one that's traveling around, it's got metal rings. So I have metal rings on an aluminum piston running inside of a metal cylinder case. And so I don't ever want to have metal to metal, and metal doesn't seal very well. And what happens is oil splashes up on the cylinder wall, it sticks to the cylinder wall, and those rings actually ride on a film of oil. They do not touch the cylinder wall. When they do, That's where you get scoring and seizure that takes place. And so the oil acts as a seal. It seals the rings to the cylinder wall. It acts as that cushion in there. Rubber seals, your main bearing seals, they're rubber, but they also have a little film of oil in there that the rubber seal rides on. The rubber doesn't ride on the metal. It rides on a film of oil, and it actually seals it so air doesn't travel in and out of them, and oil leaks out in and out of them. And the last one reduces friction and wear. We want that engine to turn as freely as possible so I can make the best use of every gallon of fuel that I pour into it.